Hey, it's Becca. Welcome to my channel and to part 2 of repainting our kitchen countertops. Last week I shared how badly our countertops had started to amber after I epoxied them to look like Calacatta marble a few years ago, and I began the process to redo them. If you'd like to see that video, I will link it at the end of this one. So now I'm picking up where I left off, and that was I just added a second coat of Valspar Bistro White. This is my base coat. Now I could leave them just like this, nice crisp white. However, I am going to be recreating the veins. This time I will not be using epoxy, I'll be using polyacrylic instead because from what I understand, it will not turn yellow. With my base coat dry, it's time to get creative. First step includes 1 part paint of your choice, 1 part glaze, and 3 or 4 parts water, and just mix it together like you see me doing here. You kind of want a watery finish. You do not want this thick at all. You'll also need a sea sponge and a rag. Okay, here we go. No turning back. After watching several tutorials, some people do this step last, some did it first, and I liked that method of doing this first. I think it adds a really cool dimension. All I did was load up that sponge with the paint mixture, blot off the excess, and just stamp it onto the countertop. Now, you do not want to let this paint dry. You've got to do this quickly. Take your dry rag. Some people will use a plastic bag. I prefer the dry rag method, much like Amy Howard does, and you want to start blotting. You can pull it as well, blot and pull. Some people call this stippling. What you're doing again is adding dimension. You can leave it darker in certain areas. There is no rhyme or reason. You do what you like. And you can see here, the more I blot, the lighter the paint is getting. It's worth noting as well, I am working in small sections, and that again is because I do not want this paint to dry before I have a chance to work with it. I love the dimension that this step is adding. Again, you could do this last, but I chose to do it first. Now, once it's dry, I'll sand it lightly, and then it's time to add the veins. And to do the veining, I used 1 part paint, 1 part glaze, a few parts water, and a duck feather. You could use a small paintbrush if you prefer. Try not to be nervous when you start this part. Just remember, if you don't like it, just wipe it up and start over. Basically, just take the feather and go up and down, and no random pattern, although I will say I am going at an angle. Several tutorials were very clear about this. You don't want your veins looking like a straight up and down line or left and right line or a curly snake. You want to go at a slight angle. It just helps it to look a bit more authentic. Now you could leave your vein just like this if you wanted, but I want mine to look a bit feathered or cloudy, if you will. So I'm just taking a chip brush and stamping it up and down, pulling it out just a bit. I like the cloudy look that this gives it. Now that those veins are done, I'm going to go in with a darker mixture and ever so gently add darker veins, just randomly here and there. Again, I feel as though this gives my veins a bit of dimension. You could then leave them just like that. You could blot them with a rag or with a chip brush like I'm doing. Once this process is done, I'll let the countertops dry and then sand them ever so lightly with the 220 sand block, and then we'll move on to our next step. In a paint tray, I mixed 1 part Bistro White with 3 or 4 parts water. You can see how watery it is. And I'm just gonna paint right over everything that I just did. I know you might be thinking, why are you doing that? But again, just think dimension. You're trying to recreate the look of authentic marble. So again, I'm doing small sections, spread it around, up and down, left and right. And then, again, you could take a plastic bag and do this step, but I'm using the dry rag and just start blotting. You can do it heavier or lighter in certain areas and just keep going over it until you're satisfied. Now with this all done, you can see how it looks a little bit lighter, a lot of dimension, and now I'm just gonna sand all that off. No, this is just a 220, lightly sand because we have one more step to complete our countertops. Once the sanding's done, I'm quickly gonna go over them with the tack cloth just to get up all that little debris. Last step in the process, we have to seal all of that hard work we just did. That's where the polyacrylic comes into play. I went with the Minwax matte, clear matte, and I went with the matte versus a satin or sheen because I wanted them to resemble authentic marble as much as I could, and it's more of a honed look, if you will. You can use a foam brush or foam roller. I prefer to use a synthetic brush, just from what I've read. It's one of the best ways to apply it. You want to go with thin strokes, going in one direction at the end, feathering very lightly, and working in small sections. I will warn you, you will have a bit of streaking. I don't know that there's any way to avoid that. The key to making that better is once your layer of Minwax or polyacrylic dries, 2+ hours, lightly sand it, again a 220 grit, and then apply your next coat. And the more coats you add, you will see that your streaks will disappear. Again, the key is at the end going in one direction, feathering very lightly, and working in small sections. Okay, the counters are finally done. Far from perfect, but I do not miss that yellow epoxy one little bit. Just for fun, let's look back at what they used to look like before I ever painted them, to then what they look like after I painted them with epoxy, which eventually yellowed, to now what they look like with paint and polyacrylic. Just a few closing thoughts. I cannot tell you how much I prefer this method over the epoxy. In my humble opinion, it was a lot less daunting, and I'm not going to run the risk now of these counters ambering. Don't get me wrong, I really liked working with the epoxy. I think it's a great method if you are using darker colors. You won't run the risk of seeing the ambering, but if you're going with lighter colors or you want a foam marble look, I really hope you'll consider the polyacrylic method. It was very budget friendly. I think we spent less than $100 for the entire kitchen, and it's just nice to have our white counters back and start off spring, with a fresh palette. And speaking of spring, I'll be back next time where the bunnies will be hopping out. We'll be talking about spring palettes, do a little bit of styling, and just get ready for the new season. In the meantime, if you have any questions about the counters, please don't hesitate to ask down in the comment section below. And if I can encourage any of you who are thinking about painting your countertops, but you've been a little too nervous about it, I say go for it. You will be so glad you did, and this is just a really budget-friendly way of giving your kitchen a refresh that you may not have been able to do otherwise. So, as always, I appreciate your company, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great week. Bye-bye.